We got to start with the most important news of the day. I want to give a hearty congratulations to the entire women's hockey team for the United States, and specifically Megan Keller for one of the filthiest moves I've ever seen enacted live on the ice. If you guys didn't see it, I wanted to play the audio, but I've been noticing that that NBC has been sticklers for that video going out, and rightfully so. I'm not even knocking them for it, but it's been getting on social media quite a bit, and just as quickly it's getting taken down. So I don't want to play with fire and play the audio of the call, but it will inspire chills if you hear it via NBC radio or NBC TV. If you guys haven't seen the highlight and you're a fan of hockey at all, Megan Keller is the woman's name. She's a defenseman. She gets an outlet pass. She's on a breakaway. She does a move. It's like hitting the right thumbstick left or right playing NHL on PlayStation 5. I've never seen that move enacted in real life from a defense woman. Like, get out of here with that. Absolutely awesome to watch. And it was against Canada, which Trump has kind of ruined, mocking Canada for me in terms of hockey, because I feel like it gets me lumped in with a crew of people that I don't want to be lumped in at. I don't hate Canada in any way. I just have a bit of a rivalry with them when it comes to hockey, because they're very into it, and I respect the hell out of them for that, and it's really nice when you beat them. But unfortunately, the sitting United States president has made it very uncomfortable to mock them because of the tariffs and talking about making them the 51st state. But it was an awesome game, and it was awesome to see those ladies take the gold, and in such a fantastic fashion in overtime with such an over-the-top move. And it's been a good day. It's been a good 24 hours for feminism. It's been a good 24 hours for American feminism. It's been a good 24 hours for Wisconsin feminism. And that's actually where I want to start the conversation. And that's why I wanted to shout out the ladies hockey team there, because it ties in perfectly. You heard my local half hour. That was with Jason Zimmerman, who is a news anchor and reporter. And I always have to taper my beliefs and my opinions when he and I talk, because given what his profession is, I would never want to get him in hot water. He needs to remain pretty impartial to do his job. And I respect him and what he does for the Northeast Wisconsin region. And so I kind of, bite my tongue a little bit when we're doing stories that I know we're going to jump into during the proper part of the show that goes out on Political Voices Network, the show that gets put on the WHBY app and on Spotify and Apple Music and all the other places where you can get your audio. But now that the cats are away, the mice will play, right? For those of you not from our states that haven't heard me talk about this before, the long and short of it is, and I did this a little bit earlier in the week, or even yesterday, I believe, talking about the last 16 years of government in Wisconsin, completely dominated by the Republican Party. 8 years for a Democratic governor, but outside of that, the legislature, the Senate, or excuse me, the Assembly, the Senate, and the governor had been Republican for 8 of the 16 years, the Assembly and Senate being Republican for all 16 years. Speaker Robin Vos is still technically the speaker, the majority leader for the last 13 years. He is the longest tenured speaker in Wisconsin history. And a lot of that has come with its turmoil. Democrats obviously hating what he's doing, because a lot of his blocking legislation, a lot of that legislation being pretty popular across the majority in the state of Wisconsin, but due to the way that the maps were drawn and certain rules that had been enacted either before or after his tenure kind of prevented some of the popular legislation from ever being enacted. And we're going to jump into some of that in just a moment. Him announcing that he is stepping down is a pretty big development here, because, again, for as frustrated as Democrats were with him, there were a handful of Republicans frustrated with him as well, mostly from the perspective of the election in 2020 was rigged. Now, there's no evidence of that, and only fools still believe that in 2026, but it's a lot more prevalent in this state than you might realize. And while he allowed for the Gableman investigation to go through in 2020, we dropped millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars into investigations to find voter fraud that didn't exist. None of that voter fraud was found because it doesn't exist. And after it was found, to his credit, after the people who staunchly believed the election was rigged found out that it wasn't, and they wanted to continue funneling money into it. He shut the coffers off and said, no, we did this. We're done doing this. We're moving on. There's no evidence that it happened, ticking off a percentage of the base. There were recall efforts, moves to get him taken away, so on and so forth. Now, I have not bitten my tongue about Speaker Voss. I've referred to him as Napoleon. I've made height jokes, which I do regret doing, and I'm not going to do here. I think he doesn't like women, probably as a result of being divorced twice, and we're going to be able to back that claim up in just a moment. I think he has held this state back from continuing to move forward, from increasing pay for working class Americans, from getting good things done in this state that a lot of people want to see happen. And what the future of the assembly will hold, we'll have a much better idea in 9 months. But until then, I'm willing to bet what government in Wisconsin is going to look like is essentially nothing. I do, however, I said I am not going to make any height jokes because I have evolved as a human being. I'm mature now. I do the right thing. I no longer name call because it turns out that the people that voted for Donald Trump get really, really offended when you name call. So I have to be nicer now, apparently. But it doesn't stop me from reading quotes. Devin Remiker, who is the chair of the Wisconsin Democrats, did put out a statement in regards to Speaker Voss's retirement, which I would love to read for you guys right now. Voss leaves behind a legacy of a state government he tried the best to make dysfunctional and leave working people with higher costs and fewer rights. He spent his career shoveling dirt on the grave of the American dream to do the bidding of the most wealthy and powerful. History will not remember him as the giant in lifted heels as he sees himself. It will remember him as a little man who was only remarkable for his gift of still managing to punch down despite his own smallness. Harsh words. Not going to say they're inaccurate. And again, I've only had to go through 3.5 of these 13 years, and I have a pretty strong opinion of what he's doing and what he has done. Going to be an interesting development here, seeing who they end up replacing him with, whether or not Republicans even maintain a majority, and if they do, which Republican ends up trying to fill those below average size shoes. Now, that isn't the only announcement coming from Speaker Voss, though, yesterday. If you listen to my promo that's been playing for the last 24 hours, 2 pieces of legislation that have been held up in the state assembly are going to make their way through the pipeline. Both extended Medicaid coverage for women recovering in postpartum, which we have the 60 days, but we are one of only 2 states to not extend it for the entire year. It's us and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Arkansas, one of the poorest states in the country, one of the least educated states in the country, one of the worst states for women's health in the country. Not a good list to be on. We're also going to see diagnostic breast imaging, MRIs, ultrasounds, so on and so forth, for women's breast tissue also be included in Medicaid. And as someone who lost their mother to breast cancer back in 2010, this obviously resonates with me because I oftentimes wonder, having lost her to a very aggressive strain of stage 4 breast cancer, had there been this kind of service available back then, would it have been caught earlier? I'll never know. And unfortunately, for a lot of people in Wisconsin, who knows how many lives have been lost in our state because one individual decided to drag his feet on this, his tiny, tiny feet. But I said I wouldn't do it. I'm sorry. I have a problem. And for those of you who are new to this story, you might be wondering how one person is able to stop anything. And I would like to highlight this for you. In the Wisconsin Senate, bills to allow for this to happen already passed. A Republican-controlled Senate. To be frank, it doesn't matter who controls this Senate because they passed the Wisconsin Senate 32-1. Chris Kapanga was the only one who voted no. What his problem is with women, we may never know. But everybody else voted yes to get out of the Stone Ages. We do not know how the members of the Wisconsin Assembly would vote because Speaker Voss decided he wasn't going to allow the bill to even come up for a vote. Now, the Wisconsin GOP would try and lay that at the tiny feet of one individual, But though the entire Wisconsin GOP continued to elect him as speaker. So in no uncertain terms, the Wisconsin GOP was blocking health care for women that had just given birth. Full stop. One man was doing it, but the GOP was continuing to facilitate it. It's just like addiction services. Enablers need to work on being enablers as well. The Wisconsin GOP enabled this man, to do these things, little spiritually, I mean. That's no longer the case. He has relented. And again, one of 2 states to not expand the postpartum Medicaid. We still, for those of you that are not in the know, have not expanded Medicaid for everybody in general. We are one of 10 states that has not done that. The other states are as follows: Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, Kansas, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Wyoming, plus Wisconsin. A lot of those states border the Gulf of Luigi. You never want to be on the Gulf of Luigi states that don't provide these kind of services for people. We're one of those states. We'd rather send the money to Argentina, apparently, here in Wisconsin, because something about America first. I don't know. I tend to lose the plot sometimes when it comes to GOP politics. So we still have more work that needs to be done. But this is a phenomenal day for women in Wisconsin. It's about freaking time, in this humble talk show host's opinion. And I am excited to watch the assembly pass this with flying colors. And even though it is February 20th, so we know they're about done for working for the year, I think that a special session will be called to bring this to account and actually have the vote and get this across the finish line. Be excited to see if Speaker Voss votes yes or no on it. But for the record, and I don't care about credits. I just care that good, positive things get done. But I'm watching Republican media spin themselves into knots to say that this was a Republican achievement after this has been an effort from the Democratic Party of Wisconsin since before I moved out here, and has exclusively been blocked by Republicans. This is not a Republican victory. About freaking time you pulled your heads out of your you-know-whats and did the right thing. But you got to wake up a lot earlier than that to sneak one past me. This is not a Republican victory. One more thing before I move on from this story. Anna, actually, who filled in on the show a couple of weeks ago, who's enjoying a couple of the comments that I'm making here, I see in the text line. She sent me a BBC article that actually stuck out to me because if you don't know this about me, I'm a rehabbed gamer. I was realistically, if I had to put a realistic number on it, probably one of the top 10 gamers of all time. I really don't game anymore, but if I had to guess, I'm still probably in the top 10% of all gamers. I feel like that's a conservative answer to how I was obscenely good at what I did. And it turns out, according to BBC, that a video game study finds that losers are much more likely to harass women. 2 researchers analyzed how men treated women while playing 163 games of Halo 3. Men who performed poorly in the games responded by being incredibly hostile to female players, whereas the guys that win were much more pleasant to other players, both men and women. And I'm very good at Halo, or at least I was. I've kind of lost a step at this point. But I'm willing to bet Speaker Voss was not particularly good at these games, because that man, not particularly keen on women, and he should be embarrassed for having dragged his feet as long as he has on this piece of legislation. Just get good, Robin. That's all you got to do. The girls will come after that. So sorry that you're so frustrated with the other gender so much that you decided to take it out on them this way. But I'm glad you finally entered adulthood here and decided to do the right thing. We've been waiting patiently for you to get here, and we're glad you finally got here. Glad we're about done talking about that man for the rest of my professional career and hopefully life. We'll see what happens here. But that's all I have to say about that. If anybody else wants to chime in, 920-281-1150, 920-281-1150. I know especially locally, Speaker Voss's attitude has frustrated quite a few of you here. Oftentimes, being viewed, I believe his favorability rating is actually lower than Senator Ron Johnson's in terms of least popular people representing this state right now. Weird how it keeps coming from one side of the aisle. I'll never be able to figure out why that is. But I welcome your input if you guys are interested in sharing it. Otherwise, we are going to move on to a conversation that I really haven't been talking about as much as I probably should be since the Trump administration took effect. It's an international story dealing with what's going on in the Middle East. We're learning about the Board of Peace, and this still ties into Wisconsin, by the way, as one state senator is proposing legislation to clamp down on free speech that has specifically caught my eye. And I would like to jump into that with you and then show you how people on the national scene are talking about things as well. And I want to determine when the America First crowd is going to speak up about this. I have a wager that the answer is never, but I'm going to keep highlighting it until we get to the point where the hypocrisy goes away, which will probably be never. Wait until you hear this story, what one Wisconsin representative is suggesting, what Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel is suggesting, and what his new Board of Peace is intending to do. All that coming up on the other side of the break. Outside the Box, Ben Cominos, WHBY, and Political Voices Network. All right, I've returned. By the way, yesterday's show was one of my more favorite shows that I've done recently. I had a great conversation with Matt Miller, an antitrust lawyer, co-host of the Fair Fight podcast, focusing on data centers, AI, eminent domain. If you guys didn't get a chance to listen to it, it is on the WHBY app and on the Political Voices channel. It's about a 25-minute conversation in the first hour of the show. I would highly recommend go ahead and giving that a look. I see Hal messaging saying, good news, Ben. Meta, the company that owns Facebook and Instagram, just took out a patent for an AI that will allow you to post and comment after you're dead. I suppose that could eventually extend to your broadcast. So next time you go to Thailand and the plane should crash, you might still be able to broadcast. It's according to Cord Cutters News, the YouTube channel. But that's good news. That is good news. I do have a theory that we're gonna stop getting new movie stars, and like every movie's just gonna have like dead Tom Cruise and dead Tom Hanks and other people named Tom, I'm sure, that are phenomenal actors. And we're just going to stop hiring new people. We're just going to have the celebrities of yesteryear in perpetuity, because then movie studios could save on the cost of production. So that's always been a theory of mine that seems to be getting borne out in reality here, according to what Hal is reading there, which is just fantastic news. And Jim said, in response to my last segment there about Voss and specifically Gableman on the 2020 election investigation, he says, wasn't it the courts were starting to go after those two for contempt of court for both illegally withholding documents and providing zero evidence of voter fraud? Upcoming accountability on those two crooks ended the sham investigation. That absolutely lent itself to it as well. And unfortunately, to the crew, the people that want to see the SAVE Act passed are the same people that were mad at Speaker Voss. You know what I mean? There comes a time, like, I'm all for political differences in political philosophy. I am all for differences of opinion based in reality. I have no respect for anybody who's still claiming that 2020 was rigged. I just think at this point you're too far gone to be salvaged. And I give the benefit of the doubt. I said it earlier this week. I always extend the benefit of the doubt for the purpose of having conversations. When there's no doubt anymore, there comes a time when I look stupid. So I really don't have any time for entertaining people that think that 2024 or 2020 was rigged. Hell, I have been offered multiple times to have people on this program that are convinced that Elon Musk rigged the 2024 election and that Kamala Harris actually won. I don't even respond to the emails. I don't even turn them down. I just ignore them and continue about my life, because I would be embarrassed if I actually brought that stuff onto Outside the Box airwaves. No, just not happening. But if I'm not playing that game, then I sure as hell am not playing the 2020 election was rigged either. I actually shared a meme on my Facebook page. It's the commonly used template where it's three dragons, like three heads of dragons, and two of them are very stern, and one of them is very dopey looking. And one of the stern dragons says, "Give a life sentence to a former president for attempting an insurrection." One of the stern dragons says, "Arrest a member of the royal family for being in the Epstein files." And then the third dragon, the dopey dragon, just simply says this: the Dow right now is over 50,000. And that's what we have to deal with here in this country. But so, I mean, Korea's president is currently serving a life sentence for trying to institute martial law because he believed an election was rigged. Must be nice. Must be nice to live in a real country. I'm work to try that out someday. But okay, so moving on to the international scene here. And I do see Joe messaging about Iran. I am going to tie that into Iran as well. Well, actually, I want to read what you said here right now because this does get to a larger point here. It says, heard on the news where Trump is giving Iran approximately 10 days. Otherwise, there's going to be war or some kind of attack, some kind of violence, I should say. But Vice President Vance is strongly leading towards negotiation and diplomacy, and that's the difference between having someone who served in the military, even though he doesn't always represent that, and someone who absolutely did not. They realize that war conflict is not the best answer. Your thoughts? And I do want to say I heard that statement in the top of the hour news during CBS News's 3-minute little thing they do. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening later, it doesn't get into the broadcast, but if you're listening terrestrially, you hear it. First of all, I commend Vance for saying these things. I think it's the right things to be saying, and it actually frustrates me from a left-leaning perspective because I don't know if he's telling the truth or not, but I do want to believe that part of his because I do think he's a fake populist, that being J.D. Vance, but I do think there's a certain element of him that does understand that war is hell and that the never-ending fighting, especially on behalf of another country for reasons that aren't fully being described to us, needs to come to a conclusion here. But it also highlights to me, and like anyone frustrated with ICE or the big beautiful bill or Donald Trump in general, all the Democrats had to do was what J.D. Vance just did in regards to Israel-Palestine. The fact that Kamala Harris could not condemn or say that she would take a different approach to how Israel was handling Gaza is why we're dealing with this right now. And that is also why J.D. Vance is covering for it. So Republicans can have their cake and eat it too. If Iran doesn't capitulate in the ways that Donald Trump wants to see, there's going to be bloodshed. And then they can also say that part of their party is against that bloodshed, even though that it happened. It's going to happen. Whereas the Democratic Party wouldn't even allow a Palestinian speaker at the DNC in 2024, did not take the uncommitted movement seriously, did not present themselves as anti-war at any point. I don't believe for a second that the Republican Party is anti-war. The establishment, people that vote for them, sure. The people that are actually in power, no, not even a little bit do I believe that they are anti-war. But J.D. Vance, were he to run in 2028, which looks like a pretty high likelihood, is going to be able to say, I actually am not in favor of the way that Donald Trump has been handling the Middle East. And were I to win, I would be able to, I will be handling it a much different way. Whereas Kamala Harris was asked, is there anything about the Biden administration that you find disagreeable? And she said no. The easiest slam dunk ever, passed up on. So do I believe that J.D. Vance would actually not do that? I think I do. And it ticks me off that liberals couldn't figure out a way to come to that conclusion, especially given the fact that when I was a child, liberals were the ones that positioned themselves as anti-war. The reason I'm a lefty is because I do believe the actual left is actually anti-war. Democrats are not the actual left. They're Bush-era Republicans. And that's been borne out time and time again. So I appreciate the question, Joe, but that's the way that I look at these things. We got a call coming through. I see texts as well. We'll get these all in here. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, what's up, man?
Morning.
This is Ben. You gotta, I don't know if you heard, but we're doing YouTube now, so you got to say your name the first couple times so people know who you are. But this is Ben, regular caller.
Yeah, that's Ben.
Yeah.
Ben, same name as you.
Yes.
Good, strong name.
Strong name, yes.
I think, when it comes to politicians, the uniparty, both sides will find some way to justify a war. And I've said this on your show many times, that it seems like the only thing the Republicans and Democrats could ever agree on is war.
Yeah.
Or money being funneled through the military-industrial complex to, fund a war. So, I don't know if you cover this. I just started listening, but Trump did something to where Gaza or Israel is getting $17 billion of the U.S. taxpayer money.
Yeah, at least for starters. Yeah, I'm getting there. I haven't gotten there yet, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Your thoughts on it.
I saw that and I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, why are we giving Israel $17 billion?"
Did you see Mike Huckabee? Did you see what Mike Huckabee said?
No.
He said we should not only be. He said Israel shouldn't pay for Gaza's reconstruction, and America should pay Israel reparations for the last 2.5 years. And I'm going to play the audio in a second, but go ahead.
That's insane talk. That's ridiculous. And the voters, the people who voted for Trump,
yeah,
we were fed up with, let's send never-ending amounts of taxpayer dollars to Ukraine.
Right.
And you don't hear nothing about Ukraine. You don't hear nothing about Putin or anything or any of that stuff anymore. But yet, in the name of Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu and, all the corruption that goes on in their government, let's, not that Ukraine has a great government either. I'm not saying they do.
Sure.
But I'm saying, this is tick for tat. It's just taking money and redistributing it to a different, country for a different war. It's ridiculous.
I couldn't agree with you more, and you couldn't have teed me up better for this segment. Keep listening, Ben. I appreciate your comments. You're going to wait until you hear where society's going here, but I appreciate that. You take it easy, man. Have a good weekend. And that's for those of you, I don't know if he's called this week or not, but that's Ben. He and I are on different sides of the aisle, but find we agree on a lot more than we disagree a lot of times. Sometimes it gets heated with us, but more often than not, it kind of ends the way that it just went right there. And I actually want to start from the local perspective here. We have a state senator actually from Northeast Wisconsin, Ron Tussler, who is currently trying to pass through the Wisconsin Senate right now a piece of legislation that would make any form of criticism against the Israeli government illegal, punishable. And that includes being a talk show host that has been pretty critical of the IDF since day one. And this is coming from people that claim to be defending freedom of speech. And I kind of teased the audio about Mike Huckabee there with Ben a second ago. This is verbatim. This is him talking on Fox News about what's going on, what they hope the future of this situation is going to look like.
Should Israel be expected to even pay one penny to rebuild Gaza at this point?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I'll tell you, if anything, there ought to be reparations to Israel for the extraordinary fight that they have had to conduct to get their hostages back, 252, including many Americans.
So we've had an American left who essentially the Democrats sacrificed this election in the name of refusing to put stipulations on the weapons going to Israel, as we have watched countless civilians be murdered. Don't get me wrong, Donald Trump's murdering Venezuelans off the coast of Venezuela. Like I oftentimes state, Democrats defend a status quo. The status quo was, we're not doing war crimes, but we're absolutely going to fund them. Republicans are here to drag us further away from that status quo. that being dragged away being, we're physically going to do the war crimes while also still funding the war crimes. And now we have the ambassador to Israel saying not only should Israel not be contributing to rebuilding Gaza, but that they should receive extra money from Americans for the battle that they went through, that over 60% of Americans didn't want to be taking part in. We've got local governments trying to quiet trying to quiet any type of dissent that may be out there, including this show. Oh, and by the way, Cynthia points out, and Ben and I have talked about this multiple times over, Ben served in Afghanistan, and that's the way that he was talking about this kind of stuff. He's seen it firsthand. This is why he's able to look at this through this lens. But so you're watching these two conversations happen simultaneously on the state level, in the state that I do this show in, as well as on the national level, as well as on the, and then you look at the international level, and that's Trump's Board of Peace. And the 17 million Ben's talking about, I've only seen it at 15 based on the most up-to-date reporting that I have in front of me right now. But with this Board of Peace, which again is comprised mostly of authoritarian governments, they have received $5 billion from all of those governments in conjunction with $10 billion of American taxpayer dollars that are going to start the process of rebuilding Gaza. Now, again, I called this because Democrats would also be calling for American tax dollars to go to the rebuilding of Gaza. And I'm not a monster, because we know Israel's not going to do it. We know that Gaza's been flattened. We know that when we get a final head count of the casualties in that region, it's going to be so disturbing that anybody who's been following along since the beginning is going to have trouble sleeping. But don't take my word for it. These are members of the Board of Peace talking about what their intentions are. This is available at any news source. Give some of this a listen here.
We plan to do this by gathering Gaza's productive assets in one unified structure. This will allow independent, professional, conflict-free management of the resources to benefit the Gazans. This will also enable expeditious planning and zoning, and not fragmented projects that do not contribute to an economic whole. The potential here is tremendous, but it has to start somewhere. The start is in Rafah, where, as you heard, that will be the first place security is deployed. The plan,
which I just like to highlight before they go on, Rafah, or as I call it, Rafah, because Pittsburghers can't pronounce things correctly. That was Joe Biden's red line, if you remember correctly. He said, if you do anything bad to Rafah, they're done funding you. Israel flattened it. The IDF flattened it. And we continued funneling weapons to them. Now they're telling you about the importance of rebuilding it. This was always the intention. I'm going to let this play out. This was always the intention.
you heard, that will be the first place security is deployed. The plan is 100,000 homes for 500,000 residents plus $5 billion of infrastructure. Over time, 400,000 homes for the entirety of the population with more than $30 billion of infrastructure. Let me put it in financial terms.
Here we go.
This is not a problem of money or collateral. This is a problem of peace. The coastline alone, $50 billion of value on a conservative basis. The housing stock, more than $30 billion as rebuilt. The infrastructure, more than $30 billion. $115 billion of value. It just needs to be unlocked and financed.
Great. Thank you.
I think the clapping is the most dystopian part of that entire clip. There's a second piece of audio that I could play, but I think all it does is further elaborate on the point. This is about a couple $100 billion worth of property value that I always have to put this disclaimer in there. If the American population were going to benefit from the destruction of an entire population of people, I still would not advocate for it. But just to be clear, we watched tens of thousands, if not over 100,000 civilians get bombed into oblivion on our social media feeds for the last 2 years. The Americans' government and media's response was to ignore it, buy up social media companies so it was no longer on our feed, and now they are intending to invest in it, and they're going to make money off of it that way, just like they are intending to make money off of anything that might end up going down in Iran as well. And I'm disgusted. I'm just absolutely disgusted, because these are the moments where this show's all about building bridges and finding commonality. And I think we do a pretty good job of that here, to be perfectly honest. But such a large percentage of the American people don't want to see this happen. And it's not like I could say vote for Democrats and this wouldn't be happening. It's not like you can say vote for Republicans. We're watching it happen right now. I said to you when it happened, October 7th, which was disgusting, by the way. I understand why October 7th happened, but I still abhor violence of all kinds. October 7th was a fixed point. Whether Donald Trump had won in 2020 or Joe Biden ended up winning in 2020, that was going to happen on October 7th, 2023. Had the Republican Party been in power when that took place, they would have been the ones having to make excuses for why they were going to continue to fund it. And I think to a certain extent, liberals would have preferred that, because then they could cosplay as the anti-war lefties that they did when George Bush was in power. Then Barack Obama wins 2 terms in a row on the pretext of getting us out of Afghanistan and never finds the guts to do it. Then Donald Trump chickens out of doing it. Then Joe Biden finally does it. And then everybody harangues him for the fact that he did it. The way that it has been covered has been disgusting, and the way that we are talking about it here is very disappointing. And I don't see a path out of this one. I think it's just going to be a red mark on society. And I can tell you, this episode wasn't on Political Voices Network, but my first Monday back, February 9th from Thailand, I dedicated my entire first hour to talking about my experience with international travel. And I did make friends, but a lot of people really had a problem with the fact that I was American. But I can say with full certainty that as an American, I was only the second most least liked group of people in the population that I was with. And the only other type of person that showed up that received more hate was anybody from Israel. And I hated seeing that, because much like I'm an American who does not stand by the things that Donald Trump did or the funding of what took place in Gaza under Joe Biden, I'm sure there's a large percentage of the people from Israel that are disgusted with the way their government is handling it. But it's pretty difficult for other nations to try and parse through whether or not you're one of the people that's trying to push back against this violence. We've had a call that's waiting here. We'll see what we have. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Yeah, good morning, Ben. It's Gary calling. Say, I enjoyed your comment and Ben's comment on that Gaza thing, but I was just wondering, is it more to do about the principle, or is it the $15 billion? Because I'm thinking the $15 billion, we just gave away $40 billion a month and a half ago to Argentina so we could buy some beef and to prop up their trade relationship with China, which we despise and isn't good for American farmers. So I don't understand this. And the other thing I wanted to say is, if it took us 3 weeks to get the Gerald Ford aircraft carrier over to the Caribbean, we're in pretty bad shape, because there are other hostile countries around the world where we can't just move those carriers and waste 3 weeks moving one carrier, just so we have 2 carrier groups over in the Indian Ocean or whatever, to maybe take some action against Iran. If we got to wait that long, the next big shebang is going to be worse, and we won't be prepared for anything.
I think you have a very good point there, Gary. And I mean, that goes to the fundamental question of where does this $1 trillion go every single time? Not to say that this is never an indictment on the people serving, but it does beg those kind of questions there. And again, J.D. Vance, for all of his faults, is pushing for diplomacy that I think needs to talk about. We've got one more call, just under 3 minutes before I got to go. But what do you have for us?
Hey, Ben, it's Betsy.
Hey, Betsy.
I want to weigh in with hi there. I want to weigh in with a high-level overview of the situation as normal. Politics is we vote for people who make us feel good, right? And I'm embarrassed to see that if Huckabee would have run 10 years ago, I may have voted for him, because at the time he made me feel as a Christian like he truly wanted biblical concepts, right?
Yeah.
And that was when I was kind of stepping my toe into the Christian nationalism waters. And I mean, now I can see it for what it's worth, and he showed his true colors. And now I think his rhetoric is despicable. But having said that, there are still so many Christians out there who go along with the fact that we have to protect Israel no matter what, because they are God's quote unquote chosen people.
Sure.
And well, first of all, they're misinterpreting, because Israel is his people, Israel, not the acreage of Israel, but that's a whole nother story. But when leaders make zealots feel like they're championing their religious beliefs, it's tough to argue. Same with Muslims, same with Islam, same with the extremists. You can't rationalize with extreme religious extremism, and that's why whoever runs has to not be extremists, but go after the people who aren't in that nationalism pool and help them to see reason, because there are so many who are still Christian nationalists who they'll never vote for a Democrat because of the abortion issue. Never,
Sure.
ever, no matter what. They ignore the part of the Bible that talks about feeding the poor and helping the downtrodden among us. That part, for whatever reason, they want to ignore. Because it's all about abortion and gay rights, right? And they're coming to trans your kids, and I get it because I was there 15, 20 years ago. I get it. It breaks my heart, and I pray to be open. So that's my high level overview of what's happening with Israel. Is like, you're never going to get somebody like Huckabee to get off of that soapbox about Israel, because he's going to claim that it's a biblical concept.
Absolutely. And I think you're exactly right. It's referred to as Christian Zionism, Betsy, that you're referencing there. And it's, again, and I'm going to hang up on you. You can listen. I appreciate the call. I think that was a great point and great experience. So thank you for sharing. And it's referred to as Christian Zionism. And I mean, Betsy kind of hit the nail on the head there. And I bought myself a little bit of extra time here so that I can make a point for you guys, because there are people, and Mike Huckabee is one of them. And again, I do not begrudge anybody their religious beliefs, what they think about religion, anything like that. However, much like within the Muslim religion, I think all of us can agree as Americans that when 9/11 happened and there were people that practice Islam, that believe in the 72 virgins brought about for doing what they did in the fashion that they did it, would be if you have to do violence in the name of your religion, we're going to question your religion. And Christian Zionism is no different than that. And I don't want to oversimplify things here, but the basic tenet of Christian Zionism is that there has to be a holy war between the people of Israel and the Muslim population all amongst the Middle East in order to bring the Savior back to earth. And if you believe that many people need to die while voting against Democrats because of abortion, well, I feel like we're losing the thread here a little bit, guys. And whether it's the financial element of it, the life element of it, the destruction element of it, just the outdated nature of war and fighting in general in an era when communication and understanding is easier than it's ever been. It's a very frustrating reality to have to deal with here. And as somebody, I oftentimes joke that my generation was raised, treat other people the way you want to be treated. Nobody is bad for being different. You got to do the right things in life in order for the right things to happen. And then millennials grew up to find that all that was a giant pile of crap and that no one actually believed it. Is very hard for my generation, and I'm assuming Gen Z as well would probably feel the same way, to be able to reconcile with. So I say all that to say, We're watching our freedom of speech get cracked down on in the state of Wisconsin. We're seeing our money go out the door, whether it be through the Board of Peace or the ambassador to Israel, talking about giving reparations to Israel. We're watching billionaires licking their chops at the idea of getting rich off of beachfront property in Gaza. Meanwhile, for those of you not on social media, there's nothing but piles of dead people in the area right now, and we're being told it's all in the name of defense. I've got more thoughts. We have somebody calling in. If you can wait, I can talk to you a little bit off the air, but we are up against it, and I have no more wiggle room. We have to go to break. We can keep the conversation rolling on the other side. All right, we're back. Ben Cominos, Outside the Box, WHBY, Political Voices Network. Outside the Box is brought to you by Roush Plumbing and Remodeling, the plumbing and remodeling company that the Fox Valley depends on. Interesting conversation, to say the least, in the first hour there. We started off in the state with the announcement of the retirement of Speaker Voss and the fact that bills surrounding postpartum coverage for in Medicaid finally being expanded in the state of Wisconsin, one of 2 states to not do that yet, as well as including breast cancer screenings in Medicaid as well. About bleeping time as far as I'm concerned. Then we pivoted, super long second segment there, just surrounding the heartbreaking situation in Gaza, new rules being implemented in the state of Wisconsin to prevent even having a conversation about it. Nationwide, U.S. ambassador to Israel saying not only should Israel not pay for rebuilding Gaza, but America should pay Israel for what happened for the last 2.5 years. And then talked about Donald Trump's Board of Peace funneling tax dollars into that Board of Peace for the reconstruction of Gaza, specifically property development along the coast, which, as highlighted, is the actual coastal properties valued at $50 billion, resources and total property value totaling hundreds of billions of dollars. Turns out all these countries that are on the Board of Peace are all going to get their slice of that there, with, of course, the help of our tax dollars. Just an incredibly disappointing conversation. I have some texts from Kristen, Ben, Lenny, Ethan, Cynthia, KG, and Hal that I want to read. But Cindy called just as I was getting to break last hour. She called back. She had some comments on it. I don't know what they were, but we're going to jump into them now. What's on your mind?
Well, Gary called and talked about sending ships. Why are we sending ships anywhere? I thought the premise of this orange man baby when he got elected was to make America great, not make America hate. Yeah. And sending these ships in doesn't help anything. I thought he didn't want to go into any more wars. He's already over, is it Israel or Iran, or yeah, he sent ships over there. This is not about keeping peace. This is about making Lockheed Martin and the fossil fuel industries a whole lot more billions of dollars because they're the ones who benefit from the wars.
The only thing I would add to what you're saying, Cindy, is it also is in the name of enriching tech companies. I covered back when we bombed their nuclear facilities in June. In March of 2025, we discovered the largest, or not we, they discovered the largest lithium deposit on the planet in Iran in March. That goes to building lithium batteries. That goes to semiconductor chips that all build these AI agents, these data center control. All of it ties together. We don't want any of it. None of this is on our agenda. And that's the industry half of the military-industrial complex. One hand washes the other, and we're sitting here questioning, wait, why are we at war with Iran again? And I think you bring up a completely valid point, to say the least.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think she's spot on. And I mean, I've been on this horse since the war in Ukraine. Again, if you've never listened to me before, Putin is very obviously the aggressor. I am not pro-Russia or pro-Putin in any way. But the fact is, before the war started, Ukraine and Russia were both in negotiations to share the access to the minerals in the Donbass region until Boris Johnson and Anthony Blinken, then President Biden's Secretary of State, showed up and said, stop the negotiations. We'll provide you with weapons to handle this because we didn't want to share the access. We wanted access to all of them for the cheapest dollar amount available for our major corporations. It's no coincidence that Donald Trump announced that he was no longer going to help Ukraine and then immediately started looking at Canada and Venezuela and Greenland, who all have access to the minerals that Ukraine has access to as ways to supplement that supply. Yes, this is tinfoil hat territory, but I defy anybody to highlight that the things that I am saying are inaccurate or don't make sense. And as I often state, I wouldn't be in favor of this if it did impact us financially, but you guys know as well as I do that if we all of a sudden had cheaper access to lithium, we would still be paying $2,000 for smartphones, but Apple would be paying less money to construct the smartphones. So it would just be about lowering the cost on the manufacturing side for a handful of companies while we still get dinged on the purchasing side. Not that I would be in favor of it otherwise, but you all know I'm right with that as well. So, I mean, it's no coincidence that that's why you're seeing all of these different conflicts and attempts to purchase other nations and things like that come out of the woodwork, because of this objective reality that we have to deal with. I want to start with KG's comment here because I think it's important to highlight this. She says, "Good morning. I have no objections to the existence of a state of Israel. Neither do I. I have tons of objections to the corrupt, murderous Netanyahu regime, as do I. I have tons of objections to U.S. tax dollars with zero strings attached going to Israel. I had a brush with the Texas law concerning boycotts of Israel a few years back. I was working on getting the service contract on a very expensive microscope renewed. State law required that the company I was dealing with sign a declaration that they were not boycotting Israel. Fortunately for me, I didn't object and signed. If they had objected, I would have been a big problem," which is a very interesting reality. She goes on to talk about tariffs, which I'm going to get to in a second. I just want to catch up on the backlog of texts I have here. Kristen simply says AIPAC is one of the major funders of both parties. Absolutely. It works exactly like the super PACs I talked about yesterday that Meta created. AIPAC doesn't care if you're in favor of Medicare for all, if you're pro or anti-abortion. They don't care about any of that. As long as you are in favor of funneling an endless supply of weapons and money to Israel, you get their money and they will tank any other objectors who wouldn't otherwise contribute to that. That's why you saw such a staunch effort to tank Mamdani, even coming from liberals, when he is objectively the most popular Democrat right now in the party. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And it goes to show you that Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and so much of the Democratic establishment will warn you about the Republican threat to your sanity and to your freedoms, but will absolutely allow Republicans to win elections if it means that if it otherwise means that a leftist who is no longer going to support funneling these weapons to Israel is waiting on the other side of them. And that kind of gives the whole game away, does it not? Ben says billions to Venezuela and Israel. Meanwhile, 19 people froze to death in New York. Exactly. We have so many issues, not to mention that Israel has healthcare for all and free college. So, like, maybe they should be giving us money because apparently we can't afford to do those things. And Susie says, Ben, I thought this was a great. Oh, okay, thank you. I'm gonna have to look at that later. She sent me an aerial shot of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a great photographable city. I can guarantee you that much there. All right, I do want to shift gears here. I wasn't anticipating. I was going to save this conversation till Monday, but given that the Supreme Court made the announcement during the 10 o'clock hour news there, if you didn't get a chance to hear it, they have shot down the tariffs that Trump has done nationwide. As KG highlighted in that text, as did Hal, Trump's tariffs just got nuked by SCOTUS. Of course, Thomas and Alito are on the wrong side with Kavanaugh joining them. Lutnick's sons are poised to make some serious bank off of this. We consumers won't even get crumbs. Now, there's a lot of questions that go into this, and I would like to highlight that while I did not approve of Trump's the way he administered tariffs, I do think there was an element of tariffs being necessary to rectify certain trade inadequacies in this nation. And what stinks is because Trump was so heavy-handed, the Supreme Court and a lot of businesses, I'm sure, kind of tipped the scales a little bit, decided they had to weigh in and put the kibosh on this before it really got a chance to take off. Now, I think there's some important distinctions to make here. Some companies already had very high tariffs applied to them as a result of the Trump administration that ended up taking a loss. That even though they raised their prices, they took a loss, and there's going to be a question of how are those companies going to get reimbursed for these tariffs that were now deemed illegal. Other companies inflated their prices preemptively in anticipation of these tariffs happening. And as I've stated multiple times over, much like during the Biden administration, when companies were using COVID and the war in Ukraine as a fake reason to increase prices, corporate greed, yada, yada, yada. We're going to get into that in a second. I said companies were going to use Trump's tariffs in the exact same way. And Democrats were going to be more than happy to blame the tariffs for the price increases, much like Republicans blamed the Build Back Better bill for the reason why prices were going up. Meanwhile, in both instances, it's the fact that there's 7 companies that control all of our goods, and they wanted to make as much money as physically possible. And that was proven countless times over before a lot of you watching on YouTube got a chance to know me. If you go back and listen to 2022 and 2023 episodes of Outside the Box, you can't go more than 2 episodes without me playing an earnings call from a major corporation bragging about the fact that they inflated prices, they made record profits, and people kept buying things, so they see no reason to lower the prices and continue making these profits. Meanwhile, politicians end up playing politics, go figure, to keep those prices high. We're now going to watch that happen with tariffs. What do we do about the companies that raise their prices in the name of tariffs now that tariffs aren't there? We should see major price reductions, right? Right? We'll see if that happens. I'm holding my breath until then. And most importantly, because of course Trump lives in the land of delusion, I'm going to read this now from Truth Social. The United States trade deficit has been reduced by 78% because of the tariffs being charged to other companies and countries. It will go into positive territory during this year for the first time in many decades. Thank you for your attention on the matter. That came out 2 days ago on February 18th. Objectively, that is an outright lie. The U.S. trade deficit, as per the Washington Post, for goods has actually hit a record in 2025 of $1.2 trillion, even with the aggressive trade tariffs. So he's going to go on a tear over the weekend, and I'm only going to be able to talk to you guys for another 25 minutes. So just to be clear, it wasn't working on the trade deficit, at least the first year. We'll never know how it would have played out long term, which is going to be frustrating to some of you listening to me. But it did not work in 2025. That is objectively true, that it was not working. It actually grew in 2025. And he's going to go on a tear, and I'm willing to bet most of right-wing media is not going to be willing to stand up to him, despite the fact that we're literally talking numbers, and there's nothing more objective than numbers. We're at 1.2 trillion for the trade deficit in 2025. In 2024, that number was lower. Therefore, the trade deficit grew in 2025. Like, that's not politics. That's not spin. That's not partisanship. That's just reality. So I think it's important to highlight these things, because now there's going to be people like Landon Moore asked me off the air, were you surprised by this decision? I said, no, I wasn't. But I said, as somebody who actually is in favor of tariffs administered in a more educated way, I am a bit disappointed, because now there's going to be a contingency within the MAGA voting coalition that is going to say, well, we'll never know how effective it was because it wasn't allowed to play out. 95% of economists said that it wouldn't play out well, but to be perfectly honest, those same economists also told us that bailing out the banks and allowing 10 million Americans to lose their homes was the best way to handle the recession. And I would argue that was not the best way to do it. So conventional wisdom says the tariffs were bad, but I would have been interested to see how things played out in the long term. It did not decrease the trade deficit last year. Prices went up while wages did not go up at a commensurate pace for those increases. Shadier companies were using those increases to jack their prices up even further than they had to. And we're going to be covering that in just a second here in the next segment. There were a lot of flaws with the way that it was administered, but I don't know what the reaction's going to be. And I actually hate that I have to wait till Monday to talk about the way other media organizations cover this, but looks like we're back to the status quo. But given the fact that Trump passed a massive tax cut for major corporations and billionaires, and now tariffs have been removed, well, it stands to reason we should see those prices come down pretty dramatically at this point, right? So we'll have to see what happens there, but definitely an interesting development. Again, I wish that just got announced, so I'm just kind of shooting from the hip here on this a little bit. Glad I had that quote lined up for today, but that's where I stand on that, at least right now. And Jerry does bring up a good point as well that I think we should reference here. The U.S. Constitution explicitly gives the authority to impose tariffs to Congress, not the president, which is what the Supreme Court ultimately ruled on. And the fact that it didn't go 9-0 is kind of remarkable. Because it, as Jerry says, it explicitly is in there. Not a whole lot of wiggle room on that. KG doubled down. And yeah, kind of a similar sentiment. I agree with you that targeted tariffs can be beneficial, but Trump was using a chainsaw instead of a scalpel. And DSL says, first, I wish we had received our tariff checks before this ruling. Hopefully this ruling bankrupts the Fed so we can finally end them. Second, people need to slow their roll with Iran. We might crush the regime, but we won't be starting a war. I called it after the first Iran bombing and the Maduro capture. I'll go 3 for 3. Right, but DSL, see, the difference between you and I think, is that you identify as anti-war, whereas I am anti-violence. The whole reason we're crushing this regime is BS. And what's funny is, on MSNBC, the leftist network, the prime minister of Iran was on. I got to work late today because there was a half-hour interview exclusively between Joe Scarborough, who people know me know I cannot stand, and the prime minister of Iran. And the second he started giving a history lesson about what took place in 1979 and why Iran even views America as an enemy, and why the Shah of Iran was overthrown. The second he started laying all that out, he gets cut off and shuffled into a different way. I do not view other countries as our enemies, and I recognize that we are the only nation on the planet that has 400 military bases all over the world taking people's stuff. And then when someone gets mad about it, we declare them a terrorist state and then engage in violence in them. That's the difference between you and I, is I don't want a regime murdering civilians in another country so we can take their stuff. And whether or not it results in a war or not is kind of a moot point. A war didn't break out between Israel and Palestine either. It was one attack by people frustrated with Israel's actions over the course of the last 2 decades that resulted in 1,200 Israelis being killed, then followed by 2.5 years of the complete obliteration of another people. It was by no means a war. It was a slaughter. And that is what bothered me, is that America was funding a slaughter, just like America would be participating in a slaughter with Iran as well. It's not a matter of the war. And by the way, we've been told that we're going to get tariff checks. We've been told that we're going to get, how many different checks have we been promised? He told us he was just going to give us money to put to healthcare. I feel like there's like 3 or 4 different examples of checks that the Trump administration have promised over the course of the past 14 months. Spoiler warning, none of those were ever going to come to fruition. If you haven't met Donald Trump yet, none of those were going to come to fruition. We got one here from Grant. If tariffs are such a good deal, why don't the Republicans pass a tariff bill like the framers intended? Exactly. I think that's what Jerry was getting at as well. I would agree with you. And to a certain extent, and this is probably where MAGA will probably agree with me a little bit, I think a lot of our senators and Congress people in general are bought and paid for by big business that don't want to see those tariffs applied for a number of different reasons, because they get their materials cheaper. Trust me, you're talking to a guy from Pittsburgh. Our steel companies, the steel mills were unionized. They were paying living wages for steel workers in the 60s and 70s. Those steel mills ended up closing down and going to the South where they weren't unionized, and they could pay the Southern workers like crap, and the business owners could make more money. And then one day they realized, oh, well, son of a gun, we could ship this money, these companies overseas and make even more than paying the Americans in the South. Let's just do that. And since we removed the high taxes on the highest earners, there was all of a sudden an impetus for that to happen. So I think it's going to run into a bit of a stall in Congress coming from both Democrats and Republicans. So I understand the frustration, and trust me, I wish a leftist president could just institute Medicare for all, since there's countless evidence that it happens. I realize there's rules for a reason, but I think Congress is going to struggle to get a tariff bill of any kind passed, even across partisan lines, because I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican. I'm pretty sure you're bought and paid for. Hello, you're on Outside the Box.
Morning, Ben. It's Dave.
What's up, Dave?
The orange man just needs to do he just, like the Harley Davidson deal was very beneficial, years past. So if they just need to target
Yes.
what companies, what industries, and go through the congressional
process. Yeah, I feel you.
Process.
Yep.
Which he just likes to be the emperor and do it all himself. If he'll just follow the rules and for a change and target what the heck we want to protect, it can be done.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely, and I think, Dave, that these tariffs were used as a cudgel a little bit, the way that Trump was doing it, because again, he always takes good ideas. He's very good at taking left-wing ideas, bastardizing them, and then getting rich off of them. There's a lot of leftists that are skeptical of NATO and their imperialist tendencies. I'm not saying we should disband NATO, but I'm saying I understand that there's a frustration with NATO. Donald Trump saying we're no longer paying for the defense of NATO is not in the name of being anti-imperialist or investing in American healthcare. It's about getting them to chip in a little bit more into the military-industrial complex and maybe into his little election funds, and then we'll give you a defense spending again. The tariffs work the same way. Oh, what's that? 25%'s too much? Well, if you buy some Trump coin, we'll reduce those tariffs a little bit for you. It's taking ideas that are popular. I don't believe for a second he had positive intentions with them, but we'll see what ultimately ends up happening here. So I appreciate the call, though, but I think you're exactly right with it. And I do want to stay in the economic realm on the other side of the break, because we're talking about this corporate greed. We're talking about the cost of certain things here. More and more data is being made available to people from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, even without their chief. And it highlights a problem that existed under Biden, continues to exist under Trump. And there's one specific statistic that is for the first time ever. And I think it's going to highlight why there's such a disconnect between different generations talking about the economy. If you haven't seen what I'm talking about, stick around, because this is going to blow your mind. We'll be back in just a little bit to Outside the Box here on WHBY. Tell you guys what, this is the healthiest I've been all week. Feeling good right now. Feeling good on a Friday. Good time to start getting there. Not all the way there yet. Probably needed the weekend to fully recover, but definitely better than it has been. I also need to get better at convincing the people listening on PVN to call into the show live here. If you guys are watching this on YouTube right now, if you look right above my head, here's the call letters right here, WHBY. Search that in the app. I'm on from 9 to 11, well, 8:30 to 11 Central Time if you want to hear the super local half hour as well. I mean, Wisconsin's a cool place. That might interest you. The show runs 9 to 11. You guys are free to take part in the program as well. 920-281-1150. Love to hear from you guys, what you think about the situation. We have a lot of fun here, if you can't tell, building this community out as we continue learning more about things here. Okay, so sticking in the world of the economy. And by the way, Susie says, where'd you go there, Susie? There is a solution to the orange man's loss of terrorist income, tax the rich their real share. Yeah, right, which I feel you. And Larry out in North Carolina says it sure would be nice if some of that money ended up in education. It will not. I love your attitude, Larry. I love your optimism, but it will not, because an educated voter base is the enemy of politics in general. And that's oftentimes spun, and to be fair, right-wingers are the ones that tend to try and cut education funding. But they don't want us informed about things in general. Again, watching MSNBC cut off a conversation about the history of the Middle East and why Iran is frustrated with us and how the Shah of Iran was an American puppet, and the revolution that took place in Iran was to get rid of a totalitarian dictator that was taking advantage of the people of Iran, and they had no real trouble with the people of America. It was the leader that we had installed. And then after they got rid of him, all of a sudden we start spinning it as an attack on us, and then we portray them as an enemy for decades, surround them with military bases. Like, you have a conversation. I'm not saying we should be pushovers, but at the same time, you got to kind of come to grips with the reality of the situation and ask yourself, how would you respond if you were an Iranian? I think we can all agree that like human nature does eventually kick in on these kind of conversations. But if you aren't educated, to Larry's point, then you'll probably just hate Iran for no reason and be like, yeah, we'll bomb them, whatever. They hate us. Of course they do. Of course they do. But that's a conversation for another time. And to Susie's point about taxing the rich, here's a mind-blowing statistic for you. Tax expenditures, i.e. Loopholes and tax breaks that exist in general, but let's be real, specifically for the wealthiest people in this country. Palantir, the country that you will soon be calling father, or the company that you will soon be calling father, because they completely own every element of your life, paid $0 in taxes in 2025, a lot of which is brought about by the big beautiful bill, but there were plenty of tax loopholes that existed beforehand. Again, when Trump's rise to stardom happened during the 2016 election, he rightfully highlighted that he was able to circumvent paying his taxes because of tax loopholes put in the law by the Hillary Clintons of the world and the Republicans. One hand washes the other, but tax expenditures and loopholes are single-handedly the largest spending program. We lose the largest amount of revenue. For sake of argument, Social Security costs us $1.5 trillion a year. Medicare costs us $997 billion a year. The defense budget costs us $917 billion a year. We'll be over $1 trillion next year, all in the name of freedom or whatever. Tax loopholes and avoidance is $2.2 trillion. You could add up Medicare and the defense budget, even the next year's defense budget, and it still would not equal how much money is lost to the largest billionaires and the largest corporations every single year. Yet we don't get complaints about that. We get complaints about the Somalis, because I got nothing, guys. I got nothing. That's the largest expenditure coming out of the American government, are these loopholes specifically designed for billionaires. And moreover, and this is the statistic that really, there's two statistics back to back coming from BLS that made me hit the floor. The first one is the labor share. And I talk about this regularly. I mentioned it earlier in the show. I'm an FDR leftist. Tax the rich, antitrust laws, stock buybacks are illegal, union strength needs to grow. Since BLS has been tracking the data, and that's 1947, oftentimes the FDR era that I talk about is from 45 until 80. In 1947 is when the BLS started, the Bureau of Labor Statistics started recording the data that I'm about to tell you. Labor share, otherwise known as the portion of the U.S.'s economic output that workers receive through salary or wages, has decreased to 53.8%. That is the lowest level since the BLS has started recording that statistic. That's according to its labor productivity and costs report. I wonder why everything's so expensive now. It's because we are receiving the lowest share of the revenue that we are generating ever right now, as those prices are getting artificially increased. And on top of that, another statistic for the first time ever, also provided by BLS data and tabulated by Moody's Analytics. It's an analysis of the Federal Reserve as well. people 55 and older are now represent 45.3% of all U.S. consumer spending. That is the largest percentage ever. In 1998, people 55 and older made up 28% of the spending in America. Meanwhile, conversely, obviously, people 54 and younger make up 72% of the spending, right? It's got to add up to 100. 72 to 28. 54 and younger still make up the majority of the share, but it has dropped from 72% of the spending to 54% of the spending over the course of the last 20 or 30 years. And it has risen from 28% to 45.3% over that same time period for people 55 and older. So when boomers are like, no, Bidenomics was working. Yeah, for you. The only population. And like, not to be a jerk. First of all, how many signs do people need that the economy is struggling? Donald Trump is doing nothing to right this ship. Joe Biden was doing nothing to right this ship. Donald Trump, the first time, was doing nothing to right this ship. Obama was doing nothing to right this ship. George Bush was doing nothing to right this ship. How many more signs do you need that things are trending in the wrong direction? And moreover, and I said this earlier in the week, I recognize that there's a lot of people in the boomer generation who listen to this show, agree with what I'm saying. I actually received a very nice email from someone who asked to remain nameless in the email, but it says, wait, where did this person say it? I am a quiet but opinionated boomer who identifies with your message and that of this grassroots resistance movement, which I absolutely appreciate. And I recognize that makes up like 90% of my audience at this point, because the rest of the boomers that can't handle hearing it have gone on to conservative radio that tell you, oh, actually, no one wants to work anymore. And that's what they buy into. But how many statistics do we need thrown in our face before we realize it ain't the work ethic, it ain't the Bidenomics, it ain't the tariffs, it ain't the COVID, it ain't the war. It's that companies are charging us more than they should be, and they're paying us less than they should be, and we don't have a government with a big enough spine to actually tax them, resulting in the largest expenditure against our revenues coming from tax avoidance, legal tax avoidance. So the economic data is the economic data. It's impossible to ignore. Impossible to ignore. It is. And if you just have discovered this show this week, go back and listen to old episodes. Download the app, go on Spotify, pick an episode from 2023 and just listen to it. I've been highlighting this for years at this point. What was once viewed as a conspiracy theory is now being examined as basic thought. It has become so obvious that listen to what one jerk had to say on Fox News about wealth inequality. It doesn't matter. I'm going to play the whole thing just to show you how disgusting that network is. But listen to the fact that even they are saying it out loud. It's just a joke to them at this point.
For more social programs, despite the fraud.
I'm going to give the billionaires some advice.
Oh, wow.
Because the wealth gap's the widest it's been since the roaring 20s, which Greg remembers was a lot of fun. And what happens, you have a great, great time, and then the market tanks, and then the politicians punish successful people, like FDR. So you got to get out ahead of this. And you got to employ the bread and circuses strategy that they used to do in the ancient Roman times. When wealthy emperors used to just throw lavish banquets and festivals and make the gladiators fight. So you feed and entertain the public in order to show how generous you are and maintain the social order. So if you're a billionaire in California, before the peasants start storming the castle, how about this? How about you buy everybody there a $1 value meal at McDonald's? How about you do an Oprah? Free cars. How about you buy maybe everybody at Skid Row a one-way ticket to Thailand? That also gets them out of town. Or make the homeless people in Skid Row fight like gladiators. Entertain us. Do something big and bold.
Now, he's a jackass, obviously, suggesting that you distract people with homeless people fighting one another. He can go to hell for that suggestion. But even he is telling billionaires, You guys need to get your act together because people are becoming aware. He says it's the greatest separation since the Roaring 20s. It's a greater separation than the Gilded Era. It's a greater separation than 1790s France. It is unavoidable at this point what we are dealing with and why so many people feel held back. I have to squeeze one more break in here before we call it a show. So I'm going to finish this conversation on the other side of that break. We're going to have about 6 or 7 minutes on the other side. If anyone wants to call in, I'll take those calls, 920-281-1150. Jerry and Larry both have texts as well lined up. I'll get into those as well. All that's coming up. Stay where you are, Outside the Box on WHBY and Political Voices Network. All right, Larry says, we have intelligence in our children. Artificial intelligence is like bringing sand to a beach. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know if you were listening yesterday, Larry, but I think I had a fascinating conversation with a antitrust lawyer about artificial intelligence, eminent domain, data centers, and how they all kind of relate to one another. And realistically, you can even kind of tie that into the military-industrial complex, which I did with Cindy's call at the top of the hour here. But definitely a valid point there. Jerry highlights that even North Korea's government and policies make a lot more sense if you understand what the U.S. bombing campaign did to their countries during the Korean War. We obliterated more than half of their cities and caused major damage to the rest. Roughly 20% of their civilian population was killed by U.S. bombing. Exactly. And what they do, Jerry, and I'm not breaking any news to you, is that I am not confused that Kim Jong-un or Il or any of them, the sister either, are good people. Just like I'm not confused that Putin isn't a good person. Just like I'm not confused that Trump isn't a good person or Biden isn't a good person. That Netanyahu isn't a good person. It's easy to highlight a leader is not good because a lot of the decisions you have to make, A, are questionable even when there isn't a very obvious right answer to make, but B, when a lot of the decisions you make are bad, like the one that you're describing right there, it's easy to lose the history, and then you're perceived as a bleeding heart for being like, look, we need to lay off in North Korea here for the stuff that they're doing. Yes, they view us as the enemy, but also there's probably a lot of reason why. And like it goes further than an apology. It goes further than a lot of things. But we make life harder for people and then get mad that they don't just willingly lay down and accept that sometimes. And there's an entire political party, and I'd argue political system, because again, I think the liberals just cosplay as anti-war. But if they had a supermajority in the House and Senate, we would still do war. Just a handful of them would find their blue dog spirit again, and we would always find a way to do this. You know, I approached the Russia-Ukraine war with reticence from the beginning because we had literally just gotten out of Afghanistan, like not a month and a half prior. And I even remembered turning to my friends when it was announced that we were out. I was only a producer at that point. They didn't even have a show yet. And I said to them, it's actually why I'm in Pittsburgh, or why I'm in Appleton, is because one of the first shows I did was questioning the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. My program director marched in and said, you need to change topics. You sound like you're pro-Putin. Meanwhile, my program director was a Fox News Republican, but he hadn't been given his marching orders by the Republican Party yet, so he assumed the Republicans would be anti-Russia, pro-Ukraine. Waka waka. Turns out that wasn't accurate. But I turned to my friends after we got out of Afghanistan. I said, how long do you think we can go 6 months without being involved in another war? The answer was no, of course, because we can't absolve ourselves entirely of being involved in conflict. How would Raytheon make money? So I get your point there, Jerry. And we could go down the list of examples. And oftentimes the people who highlight this stuff, Cynthia's been screaming this stuff out in Florida for the top of her lungs since well before I ever knew her. And there's people in this country that would be like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Actually, it's having a historical understanding of how we end up in the situations that we're in. And as they often state, we all know the saying, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Where I think we as Americans get lost is a lot of us choose not to learn from the history. I was one of those for a long time. My 20s, I couldn't have cared less about any of this kind of stuff. I had to grow into it. And I'd argue that I am much younger than the average American who decides to start improving himself. I started this job as a hobby. I started learning about this on my own, became fascinated with it, and decided that I wanted to pursue it as a career. A lot of people would rather stay up to date on the latest Marvel movie, find out who the Packers and Steelers are considering in the draft next year, getting excited for baseball season, mad that Crosby got injured in the Olympics right now. You can find time to have fun, but also still maintain some awareness of what's going on. And I have a feeling that this conflict with Iran, as it develops, is going to highlight a lot of that ignorance. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave you for the weekend on that note there. You only got a couple seconds left before I have to call it a show. If you did not get a chance to listen to the entire program, download the WHBY app. Check out the rebroadcast. It'll be on Political Voices Network at 1 p.m. this afternoon, or check it out anywhere where you get podcasts. Apple Music, Spotify, Podbean, you name it. Outside the Box is there. Just search the name, and we'll be back on Monday. We'll be covering in depth the reaction to this tariffs discovery and so much more. Have a good weekend, everybody. Outside the Box, WHBY, and Political Voices.